From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Do people get happier with age? If you said yes, then you were right. A recent study found that people generally become happier and worry less after the age of 50. A team at Stony Brook University in New York asked people between the ages of 18 and 85 about their happiness. The researchers found that levels of stress were highest in adults between the ages of 22 and 25. Stress levels dropped sharply after people reached their 50s. Happiness was highest among the youngest adults and those in their early 70s. But those least likely to report feeling negative emotions were the oldest ones. The study also found that men and women have similar emotional patterns as they grow older. But women of all ages reported more sadness, stress, and worry than men. The researchers also considered possible influences, like having young children, being unemployed, or being single. But they found that these situations did not affect the levels of happiness and well-being related to age. So why would happiness increase with age? One theory is that as people get older, they become more thankful for what they have and have better control of their emotions. They also spend less time thinking about bad experiences. Happiness is not the only thing that seems to improve with age. Another study found that people in their 80s reported the fewest problems with their sleep. Researchers had expected to confirm the popular belief that sleep problems are connected to aging. The survey found an increase in sleep problems during middle age, especially in women. But overall, people reported that they felt their sleep quality improved with age. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Today we answer a question. Vu Wang Hin from Vietnam wants to know more about hepatitis B. Hepatitis is the name for a group of viral infections that attack the liver. These are called A, B, C, and so on. An estimated 2 billion people are infected with hepatitis B. The rates are highest in China and other parts of Asia. The World Health Organization says most of these infections happen during childhood. Hepatitis B is spread through contact with infected blood or other body fluids. Mothers can infect babies at birth. Unsafe injections and sexual contact can also spread the virus. Experts say it can survive outside the body for at least a week. There are two forms of hepatitis B, acute and chronic. Acute cases last for several weeks, although recovery can take months. Chronic cases can lead to death from cirrhosis or scarring of the liver and liver cancer. Yet people with long-term liver infections can live for years and not even know they are infected. The ones most likely to develop chronic hepatitis B are young children. In the United States, public health experts recommend that Asian Americans get tested for chronic hepatitis B. This is because most Asian Americans came from countries with high rates of the disease, or their parents did. For acute hepatitis B, Patients may receive care to replace lost fluids, but there are no treatments. Doctors can treat chronic cases with interferon and antiviral drugs. But these medicines cost too much for most of the world's poor. A vaccine to prevent hepatitis B has been available for 30 years. The researcher who discovered this vaccine and hepatitis B itself was an American named Barack Bloomberg. Dr. Bloomberg also showed that the virus could cause liver cancer. He and another researcher at the Fox Chase Cancer Center, Irving Millman, invented the vaccine in 1969. But Dr. Bloomberg said it took some time to find a drug company willing to produce it. He first became interested in studying infectious disease when he volunteered in Suriname during his medical training. His discoveries with hepatitis B saved many lives and earned him a Nobel Prize in medicine. But he also had other interests, including the search for life in outer space. In the late 90s, Barack Bloomberg helped launch the Astrobiology Institute at NASA. He was at a space agency conference in California in April when he died, apparently of a heart attack at the age of 85. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. How active you are early in life may affect how able-minded you are late in life. That was the finding of a new study of cognitive impairment, or a loss in mental abilities. The study involved more than 9,000 women in the United States over the age of 65. They answered questions about their level of physical activity as teenagers and at age 30, 50, and late in life. Laura Middleton of the Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Canada led the study. She said people who were physically active on a regular basis had a lower risk of cognitive impairments in later life. Speaking by Skype, Laura Middleton noted two long-lasting effects that physical activity can have on teenagers. Exercise could help strengthen the blood vessels that carry blood and oxygen to the brain. Also, physical activity is known to improve the brain's ability to repair itself. The study is in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society. Women who said they were physically active even once a week showed less cognitive impairment as measured by a test. There was not a strong link between the amount of physical activity and the extent of impairment, but the link was strongest among those who were active as teenagers. Laura Middleton says other studies of exercise and cognitive skills have found a stronger link in women than in men. Still, she says, there is no reason to suggest that the finding about teenage physical activity should not apply to men as well. Now, speaking of teenagers, they were the subject of another new study. It looked at the effects of a later start to the school day. For the study, a high school in Rhode Island delayed the start of morning classes from 8 o'clock to 8:30. The change affected about 200 students in grades 9 through 12. In online surveys, students reported feeling less sleepy during the day. They rated themselves as less depressed and more active in school. They also reported sleeping longer on school nights and making fewer tiredness-related visits to the school health center. Judith Owens of the Hasbro Children's Hospital led the study. Teachers and sports coaches had resisted the change, and administrators had planned to return to the 8 o'clock start time after the study. But students and teachers voted to keep the half-hour delay for another term. And that's the VOA Special English Health Report.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Health Report. World AIDS Day was December 1st. This year, experts reported more signs of success in halting the AIDS epidemic. The number of AIDS-related deaths and the number of new infections are both decreasing. Michelle Sidibé is the executive director of the Joint United Nations program known as UNAIDS. He says today we can say that we have changed the direction of the AIDS pandemic. The latest UNAIDS report says new HIV infections have fallen almost 20% in the last 10 years. And there has been a similar drop in the last 5 years in the number of AIDS-related deaths. An estimated 33 million people worldwide were living with HIV last year. 2.5 million were children. HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. Africa, south of the Sahara, has the most deaths and new infections. But many of those countries have made important progress. Worldwide estimates show that more than 2.5 million people became infected with HIV in 2009. At the same time, about 1,800,000 people died from AIDS-related sicknesses. Drug treatment to suppress the virus has expanded. One result has been fewer babies born infected by their mothers. Still, the report says 10 million people are waiting for treatment. UNAIDS officials also say not enough is being spent for prevention. They say prevention efforts are responsible for much of the progress. More and more young people say they are following safer practices. Surveys find greater use of condoms, and people in many countries say they have fewer sexual partners. World Health Organization chief Margaret Chan called this year's AIDS report encouraging. But she noted that the populations most at risk are also those who have the least access to services. These populations include sex workers, drug users, and homosexual men. In other health news, a new study has found that 1 in every 100 deaths in the world is caused by other people smoking. Researchers found that more than 600,000 non-smokers died in 2004. They say the deaths were from diseases and infections caused by secondhand smoke, also known as passive smoking. The study in the journal Lancet says 165,000 of those tobacco victims were children. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Researchers are finding new ways to save snakebite victims. Experts discussed the latest findings during a recent meeting of the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Scientists in Australia have shown that a chemical called nitric oxide could increase the chances of surviving a poisonous snakebite. The scientists injected rats with deadly amounts of snake venom. Then they rubbed an ointment containing nitric oxide on the skin around the injection site. The study found that the rats lived about 1/3 longer than if the ointment had not been used. But the treatment had to be started very quickly. Dirk van Helden led the research at the University of Newcastle in New South Wales. He says the nitric oxide ointment also showed promise in humans. Volunteers were injected with a harmless liquid that contained molecules about the same size as snake venom molecules. Many snake venoms contain large molecules that can only enter the bloodstream through the body's lymphatic system. The nitric oxide slows the pumping action of the lymphatic system, and that slows the flow of venom into the blood. The study appeared in the journal Nature Medicine. Scientists say the findings could help save many lives. A study from 2008 found that poisonous snakes cause as many as 94,000 deaths worldwide each year. But Ulrich Kook of the Biodiversity and Climate Research Center in Frankfurt, Germany, says new numbers from very rigorously designed and well-conducted studies in India and Bangladesh have come up with numbers that suggest that the real death toll of snake bites at the global level is much higher. Mr. Kook says many deaths could be prevented, but snakebite victims often go to traditional healers or do not seek any help at all. Either because there is no treatment available, no antivenom, which is the specific drug to treat snake bites, or because healthcare staff do not know how to treat snake bites, or because transportation to get to a health facility is not available or too expensive. There is no single antivenom that can be used to treat all snake bites. The antivenom must be specific to the kind of snake that bit the person. In some countries, the treatment is expensive. In others, the problem is a lack of availability or a lack of training in treating snake bites. New tests are being developed to help rural health workers know the right antivenom to give. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Health Report. 2 recent studies have found that punishment is not the best way to influence behavior. One showed that adults are much more cooperative if they work in a system based on rewards. Researchers at Harvard University in the United States and the Stockholm School of Economics in Sweden did the study. They had about 200 college students play a version of the game known as the prisoner's dilemma. The game is based on the tension between the interests of an individual and a group. The students played in groups of 4. Each player could win points for the group, so they would all gain equally. But each player could also reward or punish each of the other 3 players at a cost to the punisher. Harvard researcher David Rand says the most successful behavior proved to be cooperation. The groups that rewarded it the most earned about twice as much in the game as the groups that rewarded it the least. And the more a group punished itself, the lower its earnings. The group with the most punishment earned 25% less than the group with the least punishment. The study appeared in September in the journal Science. The other study involved children. It was presented in September in California at a conference on violence and abuse. Researchers used intelligence tests given to two groups. More than 800 children were ages 2 to 4 the first time they were tested. More than 700 children were ages 5 to 9. The two groups were retested 4 years later, and the study compared the results with the first test. Both groups contained children whose parents used physical punishment and children whose parents did not. The study says the IQs, or intelligence quotients, of the younger children who were not spanked were 5 points higher than those who were. In the older group, the difference was almost 3 points. Murray Strauss from the University of New Hampshire worked with Mali Pascal from the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation. Professor Strauss has written extensively about physical punishment of children. He says the more they are spanked, the slower their mental development. He also looked at average IQs in other nations and found them lower where spanking was more common. What do you think are the best ways to correct misbehavior? Share your comments at voaspecialenglish.com. And that's the VOA Special English Health Report.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Is chocolate good for our health, or does it just taste good? Many experts warn that the sugar in chocolate is not good for us. But doctors say there are also healthful substances in chocolate, like antioxidants. Some experts say uncooked, pure chocolate may contain just the right balance. The biggest value in eating cocoa and dark chocolate may be their ability to lower blood pressure. This comes from the experience of cocoa butter melting in your mouth. That happy feeling may also add to chocolate's antidepressant qualities, says Kim Hoffman. Ms. Hoffman is a dietitian, a person who advises people about healthy eating. She says the phenethylamines in dark chocolate make us feel better. Phenethylamines are also naturally produced by the brain. She says they create a happy feeling. But not all chocolate is equal. The process of producing chocolate affects its health benefits. The heat required to process most chocolate can be as high as 130 degrees centigrade. Some researchers say such high temperatures can actually lower the effectiveness of chocolate's healthful chemicals. Business owner Anthony Grid makes chocolate at his store in Cape Town, South Africa. he keeps the temperature of his uncooked chocolate below 42 degrees. He says many food experts support lower cooking temperatures. Chocolate makers can also decrease healthfulness by adding sugar to cocoa. That reduces the amount of the antioxidant polyphenol in cocoa. And as food science writer Leonie Joubert notes, sugar is connected to weight-related disease. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. Hundreds of thousands of Russians die every year from diseases linked to smoking. The country has one of the highest smoking rates in the world. The World Health Organization estimates that 40% of adults in Russia smoke. That is about 44 million people. The WHO says China leads the world in tobacco smoking rates. It says Russia is second. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev recently made an effort to reduce the number of smokers in his country. He proposed a ban on smoking in public places by 2015 and a ban on all tobacco advertising. And he proposed to increase the country's very low cigarette taxes. In Russia, a pack of cigarettes can cost between $1 and $2. Mr. Medvedev appeared in an internet video about the issue. He said Russians must stop smoking. He said about 90% of Russian smokers begin smoking before they reach the age of 20. He said smoking kills about 400,000 people in Russia each year. He compared the loss of life to a large city disappearing from the country's map. The Prime Minister also warned about the way smoking kills. He described long and painful deaths from cancer or emphysema, as well as sudden deaths from heart attack and stroke. Still, smoking continues to grow in some groups. The number of Russian women who smoke has increased sharply in the past 20 years. In 1992, about 7% of Russian women smoked. 22% do now. Yet approval from the upper and lower houses of Parliament may not limit Russian smoking. Many experts say the government does not have enforcement power to put the law into effect. For VOA Learning English, I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama turned his attention to financial reform after his victory in March on health care. On April 14th, he met with congressional leaders from both parties at the White House. He said there are some areas on which Democrats and Republicans can agree. If there's one lesson that we've learned, he said, it's that an unfettered market where people are taking huge risks and expecting taxpayers to bail them out when things go sour is simply not acceptable. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner wrote in the Washington Post that the deep financial crisis is close to the end. But he said the nation must not forget the near collapse of the banking system in 2008 without fixing the causes. He told the American Society of News Editors in Washington that no one is arguing against new financial protections. The debate now, he said, involves how to design a system that lets big financial companies fail without harming the economy. In December, the House of Representatives passed the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. That bill would create a new Consumer Financial Protection Agency. It would also increase investor protections and let shareholders vote on the pay of top company officials. And it would create a group to identify and regulate companies that are so big their failure could threaten the economy. Republicans opposed the bill. That was also true in March when the Senate Banking Committee approved its own version. That bill would not create an independent consumer agency, but instead a new office at the Federal Reserve, the central bank. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky said the bill would make future bailouts more likely, not less likely. Both measures in Congress call for a system to supervise derivatives. These contracts are used for different purposes, including investment and protecting against loss. The largely unregulated market in derivatives is estimated at $600 trillion. Government rescues of banks considered too big to fail angered the public and helped fuel a conservative movement. The Tea Party also opposes the new health care law and argues for lower taxes and less government. On April 15th, they protested to mark Tax Day, when Americans have to pay any federal taxes they owe. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Americans gave about $290 billion to charity last year. That was $10 billion more than the amount of charitable giving in 2009. The estimates are from the Giving USA Foundation and its research partner, the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University. Charities are nonprofit organizations that raise money to provide social services or other programs. Giving USA has been reporting on charitable donations since 1956. The group estimates that about 75 million households gave to at least one charitable organization in the United States last year. A household is one or more people living in a home. The largest share of charitable giving goes to religious groups. Giving USA says they received 35% of all donations in 2010. Some people give a percentage of their pay to religious organizations. Schools and other education-related organizations were second on the list. They received an estimated 14% of all charitable giving last year. The Federal Tax Agency, the Internal Revenue Service, recognizes donations to official charities. Those who give to charity may be able to get tax breaks and reduce the amount of taxes they owe. People who give to charity may want to know how their donations are being spent. Organizations like Charity Navigator and the American Institute of Philanthropy look at how charities spend the money they receive. Their reports and ratings offer a measure of how effectively the charities use their money. For example, donors can learn how much a group spends on services compared to how much it spends on itself in administrative costs. Charity Navigator recently asked donors and charities to answer questions about year-end giving trends this year. More than 500 donors and 100 charities completed the questionnaire. On average, these charities said they received 41% of all their donations in the last few weeks of the year. Charity Navigator also asked donors about the kinds of charities they would likely support this holiday season. Human services rated at the top of the list. Arts, culture, and humanities rated at the bottom. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Read, listen, and learn with our programs and English teaching activities at voaspecialenglish.com and on the VOA Learning English page on Facebook. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. North and South Korea reopened their joint factory zone recently. Lines of trucks and cars crossed South Korea's northern border on the way to Kaesong, North Korea. About 800 South Korean workers and their supervisors entered the jointly operated Kaesong Industrial Complex. They brought materials and parts to restart production for the first time in months. South Korean managers expressed happiness at returning to work. Ji Yoon-tae is deputy chief of a South Korean company in Kaesong. He said it was very hard while the factories were closed. From now on, he says, he hopes everything works out well and the factory zone comes back to life. In April, North Korea removed about 53,000 workers from the joint manufacturing effort. Their withdrawal resulted from military tensions with South Korea and the United States. South Korean companies say they lost about $1 billion from the suspension of work at the factories. The industrial area produces cloth, watches, and parts for electronic products. After months of negotiations, the two Koreas reached a deal to reopen the area. They agreed to set up a joint committee to settle future problems. Officials from the two sides have been holding weekly meetings to discuss other details. The reopening is seen as the most important sign of warming relations between North and South Korea since the North carried out missile and nuclear tests. Choi Kyung-lim is South Korea's Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry, and Energy. He told reporters in Seoul that the government hopes many Chinese companies will invest in Kaesong. China is North Korea's closest ally. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Premature or preterm births are defined as live births before a woman completes 37 weeks of pregnancy. A new study found that about 15 million babies were born prematurely around the world in 2010. The study was the first of its kind and shows that the problem exists in poor countries as well as in wealthy ones. Researchers gathered information from 84 countries. The researchers were from Save the Children, a non-governmental organization. They found that more than 1 in 10 babies are born too soon. The research team found that 15 countries, including the United States and Brazil, had 2/3 of all preterm births. 60% of preterm births happened in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. Problems related to premature birth are the second most common cause of death in children under 5 after pneumonia. The study found that these complications of preterm birth result in more than 1 million deaths around the world every year. Babies born early are more likely to develop learning disabilities and problems with their eyesight and hearing. They can also suffer cerebral palsy, a neurological condition, and a lifetime of lung disease. The risk of death in a newborn also increases sharply if babies are born after less than 32 weeks of pregnancy. But 8 out of 10 premature babies are born between 32 and 37 weeks. Joy Lawn of Save the Children in South Africa led the team that wrote the report for the World Health Organization. She says, with the right medical care and loving attention, these newborns have a good chance of survival. She says only 5% of preterm babies were born at 28 weeks or less. Those that survived birth required intensive hospital care. Only 3 countries, Croatia, Ecuador, and Estonia, reported a decrease in their preterm birth rates between 1990 and 2010. Joy Lawn says, really, we can't point to one solution and say this is what caused it, just as we couldn't point to something in the US and say this is what caused the very high rates in the US. In the United States, 12% of all live births in 2010 were preterm. This study would have interested Mary Ellen Avery. She was a medical researcher who made a discovery that helped save the lives of many preemies. Next time, learn about Dr. Avery and her discovery more than 50 years ago. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Have you ever had trouble sleeping in a new place? Lots of people do. And now, researchers from Brown University in Rhode Island think they know the reason. They found that 1/2 of the brain remains more awake when people sleep in a new place. The researchers say the brain is watching for possible danger in a place that is not well known. Volunteers told researchers they have a hard time sleeping on the first night away from their home. It is called first night effect. The researchers measured brain waves for 35 participants sleeping in a laboratory for 2 nights. The 2 nights were separated by a week. They found that only during the first night, the left half of the brain was working more than the right half of the brain. This was during the first deep sleep period, the researchers say. The brain behavior is not exclusive to humans. Ocean mammals and even some birds can have similar difficulties with sleeping. Yuka Suzaki, one of the report's authors, says a lot of questions remain unanswered. Researchers did not measure brain waves all night long, so they don't know if the left half stays alert without rest throughout the night. They also do not know why the alert half of the brain, at least during the first period of deep sleep, is always on the left side. Some people may be happy to know their brains are looking for danger as they sleep. But that extra brain work may prevent a healthy night's rest. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. South African researchers at the International AIDS Conference in Vienna, Austria, have announced major progress in the fight against the disease. The researchers say their study shows a vaginal gel substance reduced the risk of HIV infection among women who used it. The gel contains tenofovir. This is a common antiretroviral drug used to treat people with HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. The study was done by South African scientists with the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa. It involved almost 900 sexually active women between the ages of 18 and 40. All were from KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Half were given the gel containing tenofovir. The other half were given a gel without an active substance. They were told to use the gels 12 hours before sexual intercourse and again within 12 hours after sex. Both groups were told the gels were experimental. They were advised to use another form of HIV prevention. The study lasted 30 months. Women who used the tenofovir gel reduced their risk of HIV infection by 39%. And the study found that the women who used the gel more often had even better results. Women who used the gel more than 80% of the times when they had sex had 54% fewer HIV infections. The scientists say the tenofovir gel was also effective against another sexually spread disease. The gel reduced the rate of infection of herpes simplex 2 by 51%. Health experts say the results of the study show that tenofovir gel can empower women. They say it will enable them to protect themselves from HIV infection when involved with sexual partners who refuse to wear condoms. However, researchers say they will study why the gel did not protect in all cases. Some scientists say the amount of tenofovir in the gel may be too low. Others say some women may have had sex with infected men who had very high amounts of the virus. Still others say some women may have had vaginal conditions that made them more likely to become infected. The researchers also said they will carry out more studies to confirm the results. And that's the VOA Special English Health Report. Transcripts, MP3s, and archives of our reports are at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. A study has raised questions about a widely held belief involving cholesterol. The belief is that high levels of so-called good cholesterol in the blood can reduce the risk of a heart attack. The medical name for good cholesterol is high-density lipoprotein, or HDL. Doctors commonly believe it reduces the risk of heart attack by removing fatty deposits that can block the flow of blood in the arteries of the heart. But Dr. Sakar Kathariasan at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston says the effects of high HDL have never been proven. He says the new study that he and other researchers did suggests that HDL cholesterol does not affect the risk of heart attack. He thinks the study has now broken the major assumption over the last 30 years that if you raise HDL cholesterol, the risk for heart disease will be lowered. The researchers say about 4% of people have a genetic variant, a change, that gives them a naturally high level of HDL. The study found that those who were genetically programmed to have higher HDL levels were just as likely to suffer heart attacks as those who were not. A second analysis looked at 14 gene variants that increase good cholesterol. Dr. Kathariasan says people with the most variants had no more protection against heart attacks than anyone else. But he says there is no dispute about low-density lipoprotein, or LDL. LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, causes a buildup of fatty substances inside arteries and increases the risk of heart attack. The findings appear in the Lancet Medical Journal. Another widely held medical belief has also come into question recently. For years, men over the age of 40 have been told to get a simple blood test to see if they have prostate cancer. Now, experts on a government committee are advising them not to. Dr. Virginia Moyer heads the United States Preventive Services Task Force. She says, close to 2/3 of older men have prostate cancer, and yet the huge majority of them never have a problem from it in their lifetime. The task force examined 2 large studies before deciding that treating the cancer found by the PSA test can do more harm than good. Effects of the treatment can include a loss of sexual ability and bladder control, as well as other problems, including heart attacks. Some doctors support the findings of the task force, but others disagree. Urologist Deepak Kapoor says in about 20 years of PSA testing, death rates for prostate cancer have dropped by 38%. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.